can you speak a little bit to what is the entity known as ICE and what I guess is their purpose and the mission they serve, but also what is their image or their reputation or what are the people out there in these different immigrant communities feelings towards whenever they hear the word ICE and what has maybe happened in different communities involving ICE and those immigrants?
Sure. So ICE was created as part of the 2003 Department of Homeland Security legislation. And again, right out of the gate, ICE and Customs and Border Protection, their role was to keep us safe from terrorists. And so that viewpoint at the very beginning, at the outset, viewed anybody who's an immigrant as a potential terrorist. It was no longer, hey, this is a person set up for the American dream to work here, or what we view as our immigrant history. It was now the immigrant is an enemy, and so ICE is supposed to do the interior enforcement of our immigration laws. However, we have this thing called the Constitution that is supposed to protect all of us regardless of immigration status. And so there has long been efforts to check the ICE agency from violating the rights of immigrants. And the main thing would be due process, that if you arrest somebody, that person should have a right to fight their case, whether it be in front of an immigration judge. There are many different defenses to deportation that are being ignored. They're putting a piece of paper in front of people and saying, sign this, and it's not in a language that they're familiar with. And number one, many people are getting deported without ever having their rights really adhered to. And then ICE, they do pose as police officers, and they say, hey, we just want to show you a picture of somebody, or hey, there's a danger outside, we need you to come outside, or hey, can you let us in, we just have a question for you. And they arrest everybody that's in the house. They call it collateral. And when you ask for a warrant, they say, I don't have to show you a warrant. That's not what our Constitution says. There are right now, today, happening blatant violations of our Constitution by ICE. And I've done many dozens of Know Your Rights trainings where there's what your rights are, and then you really have to hone in on how will your rights be violated, or at least have an attempt to violate your rights by this agency, by ICE. And so most of our time is spent, this is what you do if they try to violate this right. This is what you do if they try to violate this other right. They can't break down your door. They can't break down the window of your car. But that's what's happening. They can't arrest somebody without a warrant, but that's what's happening right now. And so we have to really combat what is happening with this agency called ICE. And again, it's a dichotomy, because many people say you have to respect law enforcement. You do what law enforcement says and you'll be just fine. That's not always the case with ICE, and that's not the perception of the immigrant community right now, that ICE is an agency that they're going to be straight with you. And that contributes to the fear of people not wanting to get involved with the government at all. People fear that if I do X, Y, Z, that information is going to be shared with ICE and they're going to violate my protections, my right, and I'm going to be deported. And so ICE was an agency that was started in 2003. It's not like it was embedded in our founding documents of our country. ICE can be reimagined, can be abolished and formed into something that really recognizes the humanity, that really recognizes what our immigration system can be. I think ICE is a microcosm of where our country is, not what our country can be. And so ICE really is an agency that if not reined in, right now there's no repercussions. When things happen in detention facilities, for instance, where right now we hear stories of forced hysterectomies of women happening. We hear stories of people who need daily medication are not given medication. We hear stories of huge psychological trauma that is taking place in ICE detention facilities. And when there are no repercussions, what signal does that give to ICE? They feel like they're no longer chained, is what terminology that some of their leaders have said. We feel unchained right now under the Trump administration. It's really scary. These are mostly things that don't make the headlines because it's happening on a daily basis. And when they're not reined in, when there are no repercussions, that's a green light to continue forward and maybe push the envelope even further. And that's what we've seen them do. And what happens the next time there's a bill to fund ICE that comes before our Congress? Unfortunately, what is happening currently is that there are no strings attached. There is no effort to say, we are no longer going to fund you to put children in camps. We're no longer going to fund forced hysterectomies. We're no longer going to fund tent cities. We're no longer going to fund places where water is not drinkable, where you're not allowed access to a bath, much less an attorney. And so where we're going to separate you from your children. You know, when these things are happening, it's terrible. It's really bad for our country. It's really bad for who we are. And I would say, just as by analogy, last 4th of July 2019, I traveled to Wyoming to visit where my family first went, in Wyoming on my mother's side. But right next to that little town was a concentration camp where Japanese families were taken during World War II. This country feared those who were Japanese nationals, and so families from all over the country were taken to such concentration camps. Now, anybody today that's in a policymaking role would say that was bad, that was inhumane, that was not who we are as a country. If you ask such a person today, a policymaker, and say, what would you do if you were alive back then during the Japanese concentration camps? They would say, I would have fought hard against it, not allowed it to happen. But if you fast forward to today, many of our policymakers, both Republicans and Democrats, continue to fund such efforts. There are no strings attached. It's just like a blank check. Continue to do what you're doing. If you defund it, they can no longer do it. And so our policymakers are scared to do that. Why? Because they would be seen as pro-immigrant, or they would be seen as allowing immigrants to be on the streets, you know, or some sort of variation of a narrative that is maintaining an inhumane system from being in place. And so right now, we have a huge problem that, again, is not making front page news. And I hope that we can come to some way of highlighting that this is still happening. This is unconstitutional. This is not who we are.